Attention is by far the most valuable asset in the world right now. If you look at the biggest businesses, not just today, but in history, and of course those mostly being the ones around today, what's dominating them is overwhelmingly attention. The ability to direct attention, track attention, follow attention, grab attention, keep attention. And as game developers, our medium that we're working in isn't really bits, isn't really pixels, isn't really notes in a song. It's attention. It's the player's attention. It's how do we get the player's attention? How do we keep the player's attention? And more so if we're thinking in terms of longevity and not just in the fleeting moment, then really we're having to orchestrate sort of a symphony of attention between pauses and recoveries and patience and payoffs and rhythm over a longer span of time to earn and keep their attention. Doesn't just come from maximum nonstop. It's kind of like the problem of the old film Pearl Harbor, which I think had a 90-minute long action sequence, which because it tries to grab your attention so hard for so long, it loses you. And of course, as game developers, we are in control of our pacing. We're in control of what we do with that attention. There's a long history of games really driving attention being what made them exist in the first place. People sometimes don't remember this, but when we think about arcade games, it quite often wasn't and still isn't about the quarters earning back the money for the machine. The fact that the arcade machine was sat in a bar would keep a patron coming back to it. The fact the arcade machine was sitting in a laundromat, where conveniently there was a machine to convert cash into coins, would keep someone hanging around and coming back to that laundromat instead of other ones. Same thing for the bowling alley. Same thing for... It was one reason why the machines worked so well, not just in an arcade where the games were there to be the games, but why they're there supplementary in bars, 1 off, 2 off, 3 off, maybe 4 in an aisle of an area in a theater, because it draws in attention. It keeps the attention coming back. In a way, we see the same thing today with games that are driven by ads, or at least partly fueled by ads, where obviously they really want you to keep coming back because the longer they keep you there, the more time that they can make a deal with some sort of business to put their banner or their flyer or something in front of you. So often as game developers, we think about it from the game development side as to how the ads work or don't. When we put out ads, how we gather attention, how we earn attention, how we get press. When really, in terms of the food chain of how the human world works, games are in many cases driving that attention for some other business. I mean, at minimum, every time there's a new platform, which more recently has been VR devices, but even maybe 10 years ago would have been smartphones, and at every era of consoles, and early on with CD-ROMs and PCs and so on, graphics cards, you name it, games drove consumers to buy things that otherwise they might not have had the professional, technical, deeper interest in whatever that hardware, software, platform, device was capable of doing. But it was moving units, selling platforms. It's like when the iPhone was new, Apple's priority was what best shows off this hardware. When PlayStation 4 was new, their priority was what best shows off what this hardware is capable of. Same thing with Pro. And so those devices are considering, those parties are considering is, what is it that's going to drive the attention for the crowds? This video here is actually, from me, I went down to hang out and work at the Santa Monica Pier here in Los Angeles. So I'm sitting alongside the camera here with my laptop. Just got the camera running because the spectacle of the Santa Monica Pier, the spectacle of carousels, of festivals, of the Ferris wheel, of the roller coaster over there helps draw in crowds. And they're just games, they're amusements, they're entertainments. And sometimes we might use amusements or novelties in a way that almost sounds disparaging of them, but it's a very key part of human culture and of existence and of business that where the attention goes, that's where the businesses can be. The restaurants that are on and around the pier benefit from the draw of this entertainment. In the same way as the shows on television that are adjacent to, right before, right after, the shows that entertain us, benefit from attention being driven to that time on that channel. And so one of the ways we can think about game development is that when we're doing it, we're really working directly in the most valuable resource in the world, certainly the most valuable resource for each of us, is our finite amount of attention, which, of course, if we really sort of zoom in, it can be horrifying when we realize sometimes what we allow to misuse it. I think that's an example some time ago, I can't remember who the author was, referring to the fact that if somebody asks us on the street for $100, or if a friend just sort of hits us up for 50 here and there, obviously we're going to say, no, get out of here. It's an unreasonable request. But how easily we will lose hours of our time, evenings of our time, to things that really aren't that important to us. But at least money could be earned back. And that time and attention never, ever comes back. Obviously, one of the things we're sensitive to, as media has gotten shorter, smaller, more rapid, easier, more accessible, are the sound bites, are the concerns of, are we somehow messing up our attention? Which some people blame games for, but I'm going to suggest that short-form media, like Twitter, might be just as responsible for playing a role in it, and I'm not even trying to condemn it. But obviously, these are all things that address what's going on with their attention. Some people wonder if it's causing what's going on with their attention. But as game developers, we have the opportunity to use the medium in a way that, like the other day we were talking about patience, can reward patience, can require a calmer kind of attention. It doesn't have to be so constant. It doesn't have to be so severe. And if we look at the longer experiences, Skyrim, just as an example, it has its moments that are highlights. But if it was just those intense moments all the time, just the memorable stuff, well, we wouldn't do all the exploration that we do. We wouldn't do all the sightseeing that we enjoy. And we're making games and anything is possible when in a moment's notice, it can change from one world to another. We can go back in time, we can go into the future, we can go into space. We can change who we are. We can change what's happening in front of us. We have all kinds of magical powers that are, in many cases, easier to do in the digital world than trying to simulate the real world. It's easier in a game to walk through a wall than it is to bump into a wall. Collision detection takes code. It's easier in a game to stop time than to have time pass. Time passage takes code. And so these things that have a bizarre, magical effect on our attention that we do in digital games are in many cases more natural to the medium. And the medium, again, is attention. It's getting eyeballs. It's getting eyeballs to come back. It's getting eyeballs to share it with friends. And when approached from this angle, I think it's useful because it also gets us separated from being overly focused on this artifact, on this thing, as though the existence of it is sufficient for the real objective. Because even if you're not making a game commercially, even if you're not making a game to make sales, even if you're not making a game to try to put out units, if you're making a game to share a message, if you're making a game to share a perspective, if you're making a game to shift how people think, then it's still important to you that numerically it's got some impact. It reaches people. It finds people. But it all comes back to attention. The medium that we work in games.